Ofer Lichtman from TraumaPak is here to talk about an often neglected aspect of gun ownership, which is medical training.
No kidding. Hey, self-defense and emergencies can happen to anyone, and there's no guarantee that the justice system will be on your side. Gun owners should have coverage for the legal battles after your self-defense battle. And while you protect your family and property, U.S. Law Shield is here to defend you 24/7, 365 days a year with a comprehensive self-defense coverage at an affordable price. Bad guys don't take days off, and neither does our coverage. Guess what, Gun Owner Radio listeners? You can get a free T-shirt when you join. Use promo code Gun Owners Radio at uslawshield.com. All right. We have our special guest on the line.
How's it going?
Hey, how are you doing, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
I want to make sure we got your name right. It's say your name for us.
It's Ofer Lichtman.
Okay,
perfect.
Yeah,
Good.
they
We
did
did
it right.
good.
excellent. We got it. And you're from TraumaPak, right?
That's correct.
And tell us about TraumaPak.
Sure. Well, TraumaPak is a first responder owned. We're all firefighter paramedics. We have law enforcement and some veterans. And we started an effort to start with our peers. So we were teaching our peers response to trauma and high threat events such as active shooter, bombings, terrorist attacks, how to respond to that. And we naturally saw that the reality is that we are never going to be first on scene. And that's something that a lot of folks in our industry are failing to recognize, that there's a delay in response and there's a delay in how fast we get there. And even when we get there, it doesn't mean we're there to save lives. Initially, we're there to eliminate a threat. That's specifically for law enforcement. So we were on this journey of educating our peers and realized that we have to also be doing the right thing. That's educating the public and the community to be the ones that are kind of buying us time and doing all those stopgap measures until we get on scene to buy us time so we can, initiate more advanced care. So there's a lot of things that can be done to help save lives early on by civilians, and our goal is to teach that. And we naturally got into making products and putting together really high-end trauma kits that we call TraumaPak. And we love doing it. So we've been making TraumaPaks all over the country. We ship them all over the world now, and it's a lot of fun.
So calling it a first aid kit is nowhere near. That sounds like it's an understatement to say the least.
Right, and that's one of those old wise tales of, oh yeah, I have a first aid kit in the house, small Band-Aids and tweezers. And you always felt like you had this security blanket just because someone had a first aid kit around. Well, you realize, and we actually really try to follow the data and look at what kills someone in trauma, and specifically what are the things that you can do in a trauma that is actually fixable. And we call those things what are preventable death injuries. So our kits, and there's a lot of other great companies out there that do the same, but our kits specifically treat preventable death injuries that there's something that you can actually fix. Those are the items we put in our kits. We don't have tweezers. We do have some kits that have all those plus the extra nice to have that we call boo-boo kits. But a first aid kit would be that. It's a boo-boo kit. It's Band-Aids. It's, tweezers, a little bit of burn cream. But it's not meant to save your life from, extreme hemorrhage or a collapsed lung or so forth.
My gosh. So, and that sounds like it's probably the most common preventable death would be bleeding out. Is that
so bleeding out is one of the foremost preventable, yes, and it actually is the one that has the most attention because it is so easy to fix. A lot of the data that we initiated based our training on, and we based how we build our kits was originally from the military because they keep the most data in the world for injuries and injury patterns and how to fix them. And that was what initially was told to everyone is, hey, bleeding is the number one preventable cause of death. Now, the reason the bleeding was told to be number one is if you envision a soldier, they're wearing ballistic armor on their chest, they have a helmet, and they're usually behind cover when they engage in combat. So a lot of the areas that end up being injured, especially from IEDs, is the extremities. So, of course, that's where most of the death comes from, is these extremity traumas, where if you stop the bleeding in the extremities, they would obviously survive. So the data from the military shows that, yes, bleeding is the number one preventable cause of death. But I want you to kind of twist that and realize that, hey, in the civilian world, which what we are dealing here stateside, no one is wearing body armor when they go to the movies. That's as recent as a week ago, right? You're not going to go to Corona and watch a movie with a bulletproof vest or helmet. And the easiest place to shoot someone is the torso. So what we are finding is that in the civilian population, the number one cause of preventable death is chest trauma.
Wow.
And then after that is extremity bleeding. Yes.
Okay, so you said there's four total, or four most common.
Yes.
Severe hemorrhage or bleeding out is one. Two is chest trauma. What's 3 and 4?
Yeah, so 3 and 4 was going to be airway compromise. So people that lose blood, for example, or have a head injury and they go unconscious, if they're laying flat, we find that they lose control of the back of their tongue, and if they're, again, flat, it's going to fall back onto their airway, and they'll suffocate. And within a few minutes, it's irreversible, and they'll be dead. So there's simple things a civilian can learn, whether it's putting them on their side or opening their airway with some techniques with their hands, or in some cases, if they have to walk away, there is a tool that we can use that's a nasopharyngeal airway, just to maintain their airway as you walk away. But simple techniques like that. And then the last item, which is the most the one that everybody forgets, is hypothermia. So even in our beautiful weather here in California, and I know you guys are in San Diego, truly have the best weather in the country, but even at an average of 72 degrees outside, sunny, you put someone that has bled out on the street, even if the ground's hot, this time of day, their core body temperature will drop, which will lead to this vicious cycle that's called trauma's lethal triad. And what that means is, as you bleed out, you lose your ability to clot because you're losing your body temperature, and because the blood actually moves around body heat too, not just oxygen. So if you lose your body temperature, you lose your ability to clot, and it makes you bleed more. As you bleed more, you, again, lose more of your ability to clot because you become acidic, and it's this vicious cycle. So the only way to stop it is by keeping them warm and giving them blood. So what you can do is keep them warm. So in our kits, we have things for major bleeding. We have things for airway. We have things for the chest injuries, for the collapsed lungs, and then we have things for hypothermia.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. So, and again, those are the 4 most common preventable injuries that would result in death.
Right. And again, there's a lot of injuries that people go, well, how come you're not treating a head injury? If someone has a major bullet to the head and they're unconscious, well, we know from the data that someone who is not breathing, has no pulse, and is shot in the head, it doesn't matter what trauma kit you have or if you have a surgeon right there. There's some injuries that are not preventable death, so they're not going to survive a type of injury, straight to the heart, straight to the head. So those are injuries we don't we teach in our classes. These are the patients you don't treat. And when you talk about training, it's not just getting a trauma kit and watching a couple of videos. Like we put a lot of videos online. There's something about sitting down in a class and learning the differences of, hey, this is a major bleed, this is a non-major bleed, this is a bleed you would treat first, this is one that you would treat second, or even, hey, this person has bled so much that it's irreversible, they're going to die. And if you only have one tourniquet and you have to choose between this person who has bled a ton of blood and this person who's bled less blood, they both need a tourniquet. Those are the decisions we teach in our classes that you wouldn't just learn by watching, an Instagram video. The decision-making model is what's really important.
That's interesting.
Actually, Ofer, I wanted to go back up just for a second. You talked about
Sure.
hypothermia, which actually is something that we do see out here because we've got mountains out here. And we used to see, back in the days when I used to do search and rescue stuff, we would see a lot of that because people come from down here from the city where it's 80 degrees in the wintertime, and they get up there and they're not prepared and they don't realize how cold it gets. But the other thing that we see here a lot in this time of year is hyperthermia, because hiking is really big out here, and especially in the East County. And it's it's not uncommon to be around 100 degrees out here this time of year, and we see a lot of that. Do you guys address that too in your material?
We do, and specifically when it comes to trauma in our industry, where we see people dying from the hyperthermia and specifically from trauma, is actually the canine community. So if you look at a lot of folks that have dogs, whether they're working dogs or not, you work a dog to a point where their core temperature rises above a certain degree, and everybody knows their dog the best. It's irreversible, and that is actually one of the most preventable causes of death in canines, other than bleeding out, is actually the hyperthermia for dogs. So we have a canine kit, and we make sure we have flexible thermometers and all those, so that way the handler can always check the temperature of the canine. But in the trauma setting specifically, you hardly ever see hyper. You see more of a hypo, and that's one of those preventable ones. On the trauma side,
I used to have a Belgian Malinois, and we went hiking one day out in the desert, and the next day he was limping, and I thought maybe he injured himself. Took him to the vet, and he had burned his pads on the sand. And with dogs, they don't tell you. Like, they're so tough, they don't show any pain. I felt horrible. Yeah. To this day, I feel horrible.
Anytime I see somebody walking a dog in 100-degree weather on the asphalt, I will roll the window down and say, take your shoes and socks off and walk with your dog. Well, you know that I didn't know there was the reason I bring the canine kit up is my wife shows championship Rotties and Dachshunds. And she goes all over the place to show these dogs, and nothing freaks her out when she knows she has to show especially the Rotties in 80-plus degree weather. I am definitely going to get a kit for her to take with her when she goes to dog shows, because I think that's huge.
Oh, excellent. Well, and then specifically with dogs, and I wasn't planning on talking about canines, but it's all fair game. There is always subtle hints, right? So dogs will give us hints with their breathing pattern, how they, their tongue is hanging out. It's all a way for them to cool, because they can't cool through the skin like we do.
That's right.
But they use their tongue.
Oh, yeah. My wife she could have a whole show just on that alone. All right. Well, don't go anywhere, folks. We're going to keep our special guest on for another segment. Hey, by the way, all you YouTube fans, big shout out, Dr. Exotic and BB. Thanks for watching. And you two guys now get on the phone and tell all your friends. Hey, Blackhound Optics, accurate, affordable, guaranteed, sporting optics that go the distance. Backed by customer service that goes that extra mile. Great guys, great products, and a great company that is making optics affordable. On top of quality optics, they pay very close attention to the customer experience. Did you know their scopes come with mounts? So you don't have to worry about finding one that fits. We are so excited to have them on as official partners of the show. Ask for them at your local gun store, or you could just go online to blackhoundoptics.com.
All right, we're talking to Ofer Lichtman from TraumaPak. So talk a little bit about your background. I kind of skipped over it a little bit. You said that the company is run by first responders?
Yeah, so I started in the EMS actually when I was 14 years old in Israel. Started volunteering on an ambulance and just fell in love with the industry of EMS. And when I moved to the States, continue that passion. And I work now as a firefighter paramedic here in Southern California, and it's my full-time job. And then my other full-time job is the CVO of TraumaPak. So definitely do a lot of the medicine and use everything that I put out there, and all our guys do. So it's always fun to try and research new things and put it out there.
So you grew up in Israel?
That's correct.
Is first aid? Is there a bigger emphasis on first aid and trauma in Israel than there is in the United States, from your perspective?
So let me give you an example, and I could kind of summarize it. If you see someone get injured in the States, this was my experience coming here as a young adult. They'd be laying on the street with no one typically helping for a while until someone helps. there's that, human reaction where everybody jumps in after that. But in Israel, where I grew up, it is so embedded in the culture of helping one another, especially when someone's hurt, that we as first responders would have to push people away that were trying to help because they would get in the way. So it is really part of the culture of, since you're a youth, to volunteer and help. And then with folks doing military service or any type of volunteer service where you're learning these skills, you tend to have a culture of resilience that people want to be involved and help.
It's interesting. So is that a culture you're hoping to change?
And I think we are in a certain way. I mean, we've in the city I work in, we've trained over 10% of our population through the fire department I'm with.
Wow.
And then with my company, we've reached pretty big numbers too. We've almost trained as far as Riverside County. We've done already half the teachers in that county with a plan to do another half next year. So we try to take kind of this approach where we start from teachers, because then we can impact the schools, and then as they grow up and then we do the children, then they go out into the community and they kind of take that with them. So I think it's definitely something we can make contagious.
The first air-to-air kill in the War for Independence in Israel was by a pilot named Gideon Lichtman. You're not related, are you?
No.
Long shot.
So how's the response in your community when you offer these classes? I mean, do you have no problem filling them?
Right. So I'll talk about two different things. And there's a call to action called Stop the Bleed. So Stop the Bleed was a national campaign that really focused only, though, on that hemorrhage piece that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. So they kind of missed the ball where instead of saying, hey, let's focus on all these preventable death things, they focused on what they thought was the most popular and catchy one, which was hemorrhage control. So they started this initiative teaching Stop the Bleed. And that has been great. What we've done in my city and now throughout the country through TraumaPak is we teach all those four things. But since you have a group with you, why not also teach them survival techniques for active shooter, high threat events, and also how to recognize these precursors. So our classes focus on before, during, and after a high threat event, meaning before an event, if you're in a business, how do you recognize precursors? If you're in the community, how do you recognize precursors? Then if something happens, what are your best chances to survive? And then if you are injured or your friend is injured, what you should do to save them.
Now, as far as first aid and especially reacting to severe trauma, what's a myth or a misconception that needs to be corrected?
Well, I think there's the two biggest myths in the trauma, and something we've all, as educators, are trying to demystify, is people will say, oh, I don't need a tourniquet because I have and they'll fill it with a belt, a rope, a bungee cord, because they saw it somewhere in a movie or someone's friend told them that, oh, when I was in the military, I used the belt. That is one of the worst myths that has affected saving lives. And the reason is, and I'll explain it very simply, is a belt it's obviously intended to hold your pants up. It has holes every so often, but let's just take the most simple leather belt that you can go through the buckle and pull back on itself. If by chance you are able to have a wide enough belt, and data shows you need at least 1.5 inches width for a tourniquet. So let's just say it's 1.5 inches belt. You're able to pull it back on itself with mechanical advantage and actually slow down the bleeding. The problem is you have no effective way of holding it in that position other than literally not letting go for 20, 30, 40 minutes until they get to a surgeon. It's just not going to happen. No one can hold a belt like that. So then people think they stop it for a second, and then they try to tuck it in something, and automatically it loosens up. The reality is belts are not effective, and neither are a lot of improvised tourniquets. So we have to learn to just rely on the quality gear out there. So tourniquets that are commercial, that have a windlass rod, that have a way to lock in place, that's what's effective. Sure, if you have nothing and you're waiting for someone to bring you a real tourniquet and you have nothing, of course, use something improvised, but don't rely on improvising. Make sure you're prepared. And I would say the second biggest myth that we're always finding is in all these wives' tale, people will say, if you have a bullet hole, you can stick a tampon in it. That's, again, one of those myths that every couple of years comes back to life because either a celebrity or someone that has a lot of followers on social media will make a video and post it. Whether they're serious or not, these are myths that catch legs and people believe it. A tampon is meant to absorb about 10 cc's of blood and prevent, all the issues with, it's a feminine product. Well, if a bullet hole has a hole in the body that creates a cavity, we use specifically gauze, and even better so, hemostatic gauze. And what we're trying to accomplish is pressure in the cavity. A tampon doesn't create pressure. It's just basically like a seal and absorbs until it's full, and then you replace it. What we're trying to do is create a high amount of pressure in a cavity when we pack a wound, so that way it reaches the vessel and occludes it and stops it from bleeding out. So those are two huge myths, in addition to thinking that you can buy a cheap kit on maybe like one of those websites that rhyme with Amazon. But if something is too cheap and sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah. There's unfortunately a lot of fake products out there, whether it's a tourniquet or fake hemostatic agents, or even if it is real, it's expired. So just be aware where you're buying your stuff.
So, Ofer, let me ask you this. For somebody that, say, wants to keep a kit in their car, how many different levels do you sell? Or do you just have like one kit for the car, one kit for the home? How would somebody look at your site and figure out which one to get?
Well, to be frank, if there's ever a question, we're always available to answer that, even through the site. And if we're not available, we'll get back to them. However, we broke it down into the first responder community, civilian kits, off-roading kits, and so forth. But it starts with always a basic, intermediate, and advanced. Basic, you would be able to literally buy it and again, take some kind of Stop the Bleed class, get some education through our Instagram, and at least have some common understanding of, this is when I would use this. Or if you're with someone that has the skill set, at least they have the equipment. Mm-hmm. But all our kits are meant for the public, with the exception of our advanced kits or our medic kits, which have stuff that you need a prescription through a medical director. So those are for our medics and advanced EMTs. But it will say that on. So all the advanced, the intermediate, and the basics are for civilians. The only ones that are not are the medic ones.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's I took a lot of first aid classes as a Boy Scout in the 80s, and people, maybe chuckle at that, but I got to tell you, the first aid training from the Boy Scouts was fantastic. And on top of that, our scoutmasters happen to be corpsmen in the Navy, so you got a little extra on top of the basics. But the technology for first aid has come so far. The hemostatic sponges and powders and products, and the fact that you can just buy a tourniquet these days. Because I remember during first aid training in the 80s, they would spend a significant amount of time teaching you how to make a tourniquet out of different things.
Right. And
one other thing that maybe I want to make sure that we get this right. It used to be that they'd say only apply a tourniquet if you knew the person was going to lose the limb, and then that seems to have changed with more experience and research. What's your take on that? What's the real answer?
So that's great. I appreciate bringing that up. So data and then study after study and blood shed from battlefield has proven that you have at least 2 hours of a truly applied tourniquet correctly, so meaning it has stopped all circulation to a limb, and for 2 hours there'll be no damage to the limb. So if you think about where we are and how far we'll get to a trauma center, if you put a tourniquet on someone, and it doesn't have to be if you think, oh my God, they're bleeding so much I can't stop it, it's a last resort. No, we now teach people that is their first line, because if you just stop the bleeding, now you can back up, take a breath, reevaluate. Okay, now I have that patient over there. Maybe this patient needs something else. I'll come back to him, but at least I stopped the bleeding. So you have 2 hours before any nerve damage.
And that's a lifetime. 2 hours is a lifetime. That's a lot of time.
it's a lot of time, but in the reality, it could, like you said, you're in the mountains in San Diego, you have someone that has an injury, it could be a hunting accident, and that may be exactly what they need, but that's where we come in with the helicopters and so forth. But that's how we save lives, is knowing the data and knowing the technology.
What's your website, Ofer?
We are www.TraumaPak.com, and that's with a PAK.
All right.
And we would love to offer your listeners 10% off with using the code Gun Owners Radio.
All right. Well, I'm going to reach back out to you because I'm here 5 hours, and my first hour is all off-road related, and I think your off-road kit would be awesome for the off-road listeners. So I'll be in touch with you during the week, and we'll get you to call back in next Sunday.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for what you do, and stay safe, stay prepared.
You got it. That's a great way to go.
Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. You can watch us live every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, right here on our YouTube channel, or if you're in the San Diego area, you can listen to us on 1170 a.m. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform for free. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can help restore and protect the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.